Racist cop shocks black woman with a high-voltage baton. Seconds later, her bodyguards step in. In this intense and eye-opening video, we delve into a shocking incident that unfolded on a bustling city street, capturing the attention of bystanders and sparking widespread outrage. A black woman finds herself in a distressing encounter with a police officer whose actions raise serious questions about racial bias and use of force. If you are enthusiastic about this narrative, please inform us. If you appreciated the video, press 1. If not, select 0. Your feedback genuinely motivates me to collect additional uplifting and significant narratives.
That afternoon, Lauren decided to stop at Serenity Park, a modest but beautiful urban refuge nestled between skyscrapers and busy streets. It wasn't her usual route, but she wanted to take a moment to reflect before heading to a pivotal meeting with stakeholders. Serenity Park lived up to its name, offering a quiet, meditative space with tall trees and neatly maintained benches scattered along winding paths. Lauren, dressed in a sharp but understated blazer and jeans, was a picture of calm professionalism. Her leather case, containing the prototype, rested securely at her side as she took a seat on a weathered bench under the shade of a large oak tree. She exhaled deeply, enjoying the rare pause in her hectic schedule, her mind briefly free of the constant calculations and designs that usually consumed her thoughts. Unbeknownst to Lauren, her presence in the park had caught the attention of Officer Walter Kane. Kane was a patrol cop with a history of complaints that ranged from verbal harassment to excessive force, though none of them ever led to serious consequences. His superiors often brushed aside the grievances against him, labeling him as firm but effective. Kane, however, thrived on intimidation. For him, authority was not a duty but a weapon to assert control, and his view of the world was skewed by deep-seated biases he neither acknowledged nor challenged. When Kane spotted Lauren sitting alone on the bench with her sleek leather case, something about her presence seemed off to him. It wasn't that she was doing anything inherently suspicious, she was just a black woman, sitting quietly, dressed too professionally for what he deemed appropriate in his neighborhood. Kane's mind began to race with unfounded assumptions. She must be up to something, he thought. Why would someone like her be in this park, in this part of town? The leather case immediately became the focal point of his attention. Was it stolen? Did it contain drugs? A weapon? His curiosity and implicit bias intertwined dangerously, pushing him to act without a shred of evidence to support his instincts. Kane parked his patrol car at the edge of the park and stepped out, adjusting his utility belt with an air of self-importance. His boots crunched against the gravel as he approached Lauren's bench, his shadow falling over her. She looked up, startled out of her brief moment of peace. Her professional demeanor didn't falter, though she immediately noted the authoritative posture of the officer and the hard, questioning look in his eyes. "Good afternoon, officer," Lauren said politely, her voice steady and composed. She had dealt with authority figures before, often in high-stakes corporate settings, and she knew the importance of remaining calm under scrutiny. However, there was something unsettling about Kane's presence. It wasn't his uniform or his role as a police officer, it was the way he looked at her, as if he had already decided she was guilty of something. "Afternoon," Kane replied curtly, his tone devoid of any warmth or courtesy. His eyes flicked toward the leather case at her side. "What's in the case?" The question was abrupt and accusatory, catching Lauren slightly off guard. She straightened her posture, instinctively placing a hand on the case as if to shield it. "It's a prototype I've been working on," she said evenly. "I'm an electrical engineer. This case contains sensitive equipment, so I'd prefer to keep it secure." Her answer was precise, truthful, and delivered with the professionalism that came naturally to her. But Kane wasn't interested in her explanation. To him, her calmness was a facade, a calculated attempt to conceal something. Sensitive equipment, huh? Kane sneered, crossing his arms. That's a pretty fancy case for just some equipment. Mind if I take a look? His tone made it clear that he wasn't asking, he was demanding. Lauren's expression remained neutral, though the tension in her body increased. Actually, yes, I do mind, she said firmly but without hostility. This is proprietary technology, and it's not something I can let anyone handle without authorization. If you have concerns, I'm happy to explain further, but I can't allow the case to be opened here. Kane's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. He wasn't used to being refused, and certainly not by someone who he deemed inferior, whether because of her gender, race, or calm defiance. It didn't matter to him. He saw her resistance as a challenge to his authority. "Look, lady," he said, stepping closer, his hand resting ominously on the baton strapped to his belt. "This park has rules, and I need to make sure you're not carrying anything illegal. If you've got nothing to hide, there shouldn't be a problem." Lauren's heart rate quickened, but her outward composure didn't waver. "Officer, I've explained what's in the case. I'm here waiting for a meeting, and I haven't violated any rules. I'd appreciate it if you could respect that," she said, her voice unwavering despite the growing tension. Kane's patience or lack thereof was wearing thin. The more she asserted herself, the more his need to dominate the situation grew. To him, it wasn't about the case anymore, it was about putting her in her place. "I don't think you understand how this works," Kane said, his voice lowering to a menacing tone. "You don't get to decide what I can and can't check. Now, either you open the case, or I'll have to assume you're hiding something and take it as evidence." Lauren's grip on the case tightened, her mind racing. She knew she was in dangerous territory. Kane wasn't just overstepping his bounds, he was escalating the situation unnecessarily, and any wrong move could lead to catastrophic consequences. "Officer," she began carefully, "if you truly believe this requires further investigation, you can call your supervisor. I'm not refusing to cooperate, but I can't allow you to damage sensitive equipment without proper protocol." The mention of a supervisor only seemed to agitate Kane further. "Is that a threat?" He snapped, his voice rising. "You think you can call the shots here?" Lauren took a deep breath, her instincts telling her that reason wouldn't work with someone like him. Kane's hostility wasn't rooted in logic or duty, it was rooted in his own insecurities and prejudice. And now she was caught in the crosshairs of his need to prove himself. As he reached for the case, Lauren's hand shot out to stop him. "Don't touch it," she said sharply, her voice firm and commanding. It was the first time she had allowed her frustration to surface, and it caught Kane off guard for a brief moment. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by a flash of anger in his eyes. "That's it," he growled, reaching for his baton. "You're resisting an officer." Lauren's mind raced, calculating her next move as the situation spiraled further out of control. She had spent her life solving complex problems, designing solutions for seemingly impossible challenges. But this confrontation was something else entirely, a battle of wills, with her safety and dignity on the line. She knew one thing for certain: she wouldn't back down, no matter how much Kane tried to intimidate her. The first move was his, but the outcome would be hers to define. Officer Walter Kane's grip tightened on his baton as the situation reached a boiling point. Lauren Bryant remained seated, her hand protectively resting on the leather case beside her, her face a mask of calm determination. She had been in high-pressure situations before, moments where composure and quick thinking were the difference between success and failure. But this wasn't a boardroom or a laboratory. This was an encounter with a man who wielded power recklessly, and she understood that logic, and professionalism might not be enough to diffuse the escalating tension. Kane's posture stiffened as he took a step closer, his shadow looming over her. "I'm giving you one last chance to comply," he said, his voice low but charged with anger. "If you don't open that case right now, I'll consider it evidence of illegal activity, and I'll take it by force if I have to." His words weren't a bluff. His tone made it clear that he was ready to follow through. Lauren, however, was just as resolute. She slowly stood up, holding the case firmly by its handle. Her movement was deliberate, meant to signal she wasn't a threat, but also to show she wouldn't be bullied into submission. "Officer," she said, her voice calm but edged with steel, "this case contains proprietary technology. I've already explained that. If you force it open, you risk damaging years of work and endangering yourself. I understand your concerns, but I must insist that any further actions go through the proper channels. Call your supervisor. Let's handle this professionally." Her insistence on protocol seemed only to fuel Kane's anger. He wasn't used to being challenged, and certainly not by someone like her. To him, Lauren's confidence was arrogance, her refusal to back down an affront to his authority. "Supervisor?" He scoffed, his voice dripping with disdain. "You don't get to make demands here. I'm the law, and if I say you need to open that case, you do it. Period." Lauren's eyes met his, unflinching. She could see the frustration in his expression, the way his jaw tightened and his eyes narrowed. But she also saw something else, a flicker of doubt, a momentary hesitation. It was clear that Kane was used to intimidating people into compliance, and her refusal to fold under pressure was throwing him off balance. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the situation might de-escalate, that Kane might step back and reevaluate his approach. But the moment passed quickly, and his resolve hardened. Without warning, Kane reached out and grabbed the case. The suddenness of his action caught Lauren off guard, and she instinctively tightened her grip. For a few tense seconds, they both held onto the case, neither willing to let go. "Let it go," Kane barked, his voice rising as his frustration boiled over. "You're resisting an officer of the law." "I'm not resisting," Lauren shot back, her voice sharp and steady. "I'm protecting what's mine. If you take this case without cause, you'll be violating my rights and endangering public safety." Kane sneered, his grip tightening as he yanked the case harder. The struggle lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Finally, with a forceful pull, Kane wrenched the case out of her hands, nearly toppling backward in the process. Lauren stumbled slightly but quickly regained her footing. Her heart was pounding, but she refused to let fear take hold. Instead, she focused on what she could control: her words, her actions, and her resolve. Kane placed the case on the bench and began fumbling with the latches. "I'm going to find out exactly what you're hiding," he muttered, more to himself than to her. Lauren stepped back, her hands raised in a gesture of non-aggression. "Don't open it," she warned, her voice firm. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. That device is designed to handle high-voltage energy. Mishandling it could cause serious harm." Her warning only seemed to embolden Kane, who interpreted her words as an attempt to scare him into submission. "Nice try," he said with a smirk. "I've heard every excuse in the book, lady. Let's see what kind of high-voltage energy you're hiding in here." As he flipped open the latches and lifted the lid, a faint hum filled the air, followed by a soft blue glow emanating from the device inside. It was sleek and compact, its design both futuristic and functional. Kane stared at it for a moment, his expression shifting from smugness to confusion. He had expected drugs or stolen goods, something that would validate his suspicions. Instead, he was looking at a piece of technology he couldn't begin to comprehend. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, glancing up at Lauren. "Some kind of bomb." Lauren's eyes widened, and she took a step closer, her hand still raised. "It's not a bomb," she said firmly. "It's a prototype for an energy redistribution system. It's completely safe if handled correctly, but you need to close the case now." But Kane wasn't listening. His curiosity, combined with his need to assert dominance, drove him to reach for the device. As soon as his fingers made contact, a sharp crackle of electricity filled the air, and he yanked his hand back with a startled yell. "What the?" he exclaimed, shaking his hand as if trying to dispel the lingering sensation. The blue glow of the device intensified, and the hum grew louder. Lauren's heart sank. The device had a safety mechanism to prevent tampering, but it wasn't foolproof. If Kane continued to interfere, the energy build-up could overload the system. "Step back," she shouted, her calm demeanor giving way to urgency. "You've triggered the safety mode. If you don't close the case, it could discharge." Kane's face twisted with anger and confusion. He didn't understand what was happening, and his instinct was to blame Lauren. "What did you do?" he demanded, his voice rising. "Are you trying to attack me?" "I didn't do anything." Lauren shot back, her frustration evident. "You're the one who opened the case without knowing what you were handling. Now step back and let me fix this before it gets worse." But Kane wasn't listening. His hand moved to his baton, and he took a step toward her, his posture threatening. "I'm not taking orders from you," he growled. "You're coming with me. Now." Before Lauren could respond, the device emitted a sharp, high-pitched whine, followed by a burst of light that temporarily blinded both of them. Kane stumbled backward, his hand instinctively going to his face as he let out a string of curses. Lauren blinked rapidly, trying to clear her vision. She knew she had only seconds to act before the situation spiraled even further out of control. "Close the case," she shouted, moving toward the bench. Kane, still disoriented, reached for the device again, his stubbornness outweighing his common sense. But Lauren was faster. She slammed the lid shut and secured the latches, cutting off the device's energy build-up. The hum faded, and the blue glow disappeared, leaving the park eerily silent. Kane stood frozen, his face a mix of anger, embarrassment, and lingering confusion. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of what had just happened hanging heavy in the air. Then, slowly, Kane regained his composure, his expression hardening once more. "You're under arrest," he said, his voice cold and authoritative. Lauren stared at him, her chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. "For what?" she asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "For protecting my property. For stopping you from endangering yourself and everyone around you." Kane didn't answer. He simply reached for his radio, signaling for backup. Lauren knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. But as she stood there, facing down a man who wielded authority like a weapon, she made a silent vow. She wouldn't let his actions define this moment. The truth would come to light, no matter how long it took. Kane's call for backup echoed through the park as the tension between him and Lauren reached a breaking point. The officer's face was red with a mixture of rage and embarrassment, his authority wounded by a situation that he no longer controlled. Lauren stood firm, her posture unyielding, her mind racing as she anticipated the next escalation. She knew this wasn't just about a misunderstanding or a misstep in protocol. For Kane, it had become personal. His frustration was palpable, and she could see it in the way his jaw clenched and his hand hovered near his baton. "Stay where you are," Kane barked, his voice trembling slightly from the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Lauren didn't move. Her instincts told her that any sudden action, no matter how innocent, would only provoke him further. She had faced difficult situations before, tense negotiations, high-stakes presentations, even moments when her projects teetered on the edge of failure, but nothing had prepared her for the raw unpredictability of someone like Kane. "You've already caused enough trouble," Kane growled, pointing a finger at her. "I gave you multiple chances to comply, and you refused every single one of them. Now, you're going to answer for it." Lauren's heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her voice level. "Officer, I've explained myself. I'm not a threat, and I haven't done anything illegal. If you would just listen." "I don't need to listen to you," Kane snapped, cutting her off. His hand moved to the baton at his side, and he pulled it free with a sharp, menacing motion. "You're not in charge here. I am. And if you won't cooperate, then I'll make you cooperate." Lauren's eyes flicked to the baton, her mind immediately calculating her options. She could see the hostility in his stance, the reckless determination of a man who had lost sight of reason. There was no doubt in her mind that he would use it, and the consequences could be catastrophic not just for her, but for anyone nearby. The device in her case might have been shut down for now, but it was still sensitive to energy surges. If Kane's actions triggered another discharge, the results could be disastrous. "Put the baton away," Lauren said firmly, her voice cutting through the tense silence like a blade. "You're making a mistake." Kane smirked, his grip tightening on the weapon. "You think you can tell me what to do? That's cute. Let me show you what happens when people like you think they're above the law." With that, Kane took a step forward, raising the baton slightly in a gesture of intimidation. Lauren's muscles tensed, every fiber of her being screaming at her to stand her ground. She had no intention of fighting him. Violence would only escalate the situation further, but she wasn't about to let him take control of her life or her property through brute force. "I'm warning you," Lauren said, her voice low and steady. "If you keep pushing this, it's not going to end the way you think." Kane laughed, a sharp, mocking sound that echoed through the park. "You don't get it, do you? You don't have a choice." Before Lauren could respond, Kane lunged forward, his baton raised. The movement was sudden and aggressive, but Lauren's reflexes were faster. Years of martial arts training and physical discipline had honed her instincts, and she sidestepped his advance with practiced precision. Kane stumbled slightly, caught off guard by her quick reaction, but he recovered almost immediately. "Oh, you're gonna regret that," he snarled, swinging the baton again. This time, Lauren caught his wrist mid-swing, her grip firm but controlled. She didn't apply unnecessary force, just enough to stop his momentum and hold him in place. "Stop," she said sharply, locking eyes with him. "This isn't going to end well for either of us if you keep this up." Kane's face twisted with rage, and he yanked his arm free, stumbling back a step. The humiliation of being outmaneuvered was written all over him, and Lauren could see the fury in his eyes. He wasn't just angry, he was desperate to regain control, to reassert his authority at any cost. "You're resisting arrest," Kane shouted, his voice echoing across the park. "You assaulted an officer." "That's not true," Lauren shot back, her voice calm but firm. "You attacked me, and I defended myself. There are witnesses here who saw everything." Kane's eyes darted around the park, taking in the small group of bystanders who had stopped to watch the unfolding drama. Some of them had their phones out, recording the incident, while others simply stood frozen, unsure of what to do. The presence of witnesses only seemed to enrage Kane further. His authority was being challenged, not just by Lauren but by the quiet judgment of everyone around him. "Everyone back off," Kane barked, pointing his baton at the onlookers. "This is a police matter. If you interfere, you'll be arrested too." The bystanders hesitated, their expressions a mix of fear and defiance. Lauren saw their uncertainty and felt a pang of frustration. She didn't want anyone else to get hurt or involved in Kane's reckless display of power. Turning her attention back to him, she took a small step forward, her hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "Officer Kane," she said, deliberately using his name in an attempt to ground him. "Let's take a step back and de-escalate this situation. You don't need to prove anything to anyone here. Just call your supervisor and we can sort this out." But Kane was beyond reason. His grip on the baton tightened and his breathing grew heavier. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" he sneered. "You think you can talk your way out of this? Not gonna happen." In one fluid motion, he activated the baton, the crackle of electricity filling the air as the weapon came to life. The bright blue arcs of energy danced along its surface, a stark and threatening contrast to the serene backdrop of the park. Kane raised the baton again, his intention clear. Lauren's mind raced. She couldn't let him strike her not because she feared the pain, but because of the potential consequences. The prototype in her case was designed to handle high-voltage energy, but it wasn't immune to external surges. If Kane's baton made contact with her or the case, it could trigger another discharge, potentially putting everyone in the area at risk. As he swung the baton toward her, Lauren moved with precision and speed. She stepped inside his reach, deflecting the weapon with her forearm and twisting it out of his grasp in one fluid motion. The baton clattered to the ground, its electrical arcs fizzling out as it deactivated. Kane stumbled back, momentarily stunned by her quick and calculated movements. "You're out of control," Lauren said, her voice sharp and unwavering. "You're putting everyone here in danger, including yourself." Kane's face turned a deep shade of red, his humiliation and anger boiling over. "You're under arrest," he shouted, reaching for his handcuffs. "Get on the ground, now." Lauren didn't move. "No, I'm not," she said firmly. "I haven't committed a crime. I haven't hurt anyone. And I'm not going to let you use your authority to bully me into submission." The two of them stood there, locked in a tense standoff. The bystanders watched in silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone. Kane's backup hadn't arrived yet, and Lauren could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. He was running out of options, and he knew it. "You're making a big mistake," Kane said, his voice low and threatening. "You think you're untouchable. You're not. I'll make sure you regret this." Lauren met his gaze, unflinching. "No, Officer Kane," she said calmly. "The only mistake being made here is yours, and it's not too late to fix it. Call your supervisor. Let's end this now, before it gets worse." For a moment it seemed as though he might listen. His hand hovered over his radio, his expression conflicted. But then the sound of approaching sirens filled the air, signaling the arrival of his backup. Kane's lips curled into a grim smile, and Lauren felt a knot form in her stomach. This wasn't over, not yet. But she was ready for whatever came next. The sound of sirens grew louder, piercing the tense silence of the park. Lauren stood her ground as Kane's backup sped toward the scene, her heart pounding but her face calm and resolute. Around her, the park seemed to hold its breath, the bystanders frozen in a mix of curiosity and unease. Lauren knew that this moment the arrival of more officers would mark a turning point. Either the situation would escalate even further, or it would finally be brought under control. She braced herself for the worst but remained determined to hold on to her dignity and the truth. Kane's expression twisted into a smug grin as he turned to face the approaching patrol cars. For him, the arrival of his colleagues was a chance to reclaim his authority, to frame the situation in his favor before anyone else could question his actions. "You're in big trouble now," he muttered, glancing back at Lauren. His tone was dripping with satisfaction, as if he had already won whatever battle he imagined this to be. Lauren didn't flinch. Instead, she took a deep breath, centering herself. She had no intention of letting Kane spin the narrative to suit his biases and rage. She knew the stakes were high not just for her safety, but for her integrity, her work, and the truth of what had happened. This wasn't just about her. It was about standing up to abuse of power and ensuring that the situation didn't spiral further into chaos. The first patrol car screeched to a halt just a few feet away, its lights flashing in rhythmic bursts of red and blue. 2 officers stepped out, their expressions sharp and alert as they assessed the scene. Behind them, a second patrol car arrived, followed by another. Within moments, the park was swarming with law enforcement, their presence both intimidating and disorienting. Kane's backup had arrived in force, and the balance of power in the situation shifted visibly. "Over here," Kane called out, waving them over with exaggerated urgency. "We've got a suspect resisting arrest and obstructing an investigation." Lauren's jaw tightened as she heard his words. His framing of the situation was as predictable as it was infuriating. She knew this was coming, but that didn't make it any less outrageous. She watched as the arriving officers approached, their hands resting on their holstered weapons, their expressions a mixture of caution and readiness. The lead officer, a tall man with a commanding presence and a name tag reading Sergeant Harris, stepped forward and addressed Kane. "What's going on here, Officer Kane?" Harris asked, his tone measured but firm. He glanced briefly at Lauren, noting her calm demeanor and the absence of any visible threat. His eyes shifted to the leather case on the bench, then back to Kane, silently asking for an explanation. Kane wasted no time launching into his version of events. "I stopped this individual for acting suspiciously," he began, his voice loud and self-assured. "She refused to comply with my orders to open her bag for inspection. When I tried to enforce the law, she resisted and even tried to assault me. I had no choice but to call for backup." Lauren felt a surge of anger rise within her, but she kept it in check. Interrupting him wouldn't help her case. Instead, she waited, listening carefully to every word he said. His account was riddled with half-truths and outright lies, but she knew better than to react impulsively. She needed to present her side of the story calmly and factually, no matter how distorted his version had become. Sergeant Harris frowned slightly, his gaze shifting back to Lauren. "Is that true, ma'am?" he asked, his tone neutral but probing. "Did you resist Officer Kane?" Lauren took a deep breath and stepped forward, her hands visible and her posture open. "No, Sergeant," she said firmly. "That's not what happened. Officer Kane approached me while I was sitting on that bench, minding my own business. He demanded that I open my case, which contains sensitive equipment related to my work. I explained to him that the device inside is proprietary and can't be handled without proper authorization. Despite my explanation, he forcibly took the case and mishandled the device, causing a minor electrical discharge. At no point did I resist him or threaten him. I simply tried to protect my property and de-escalate the situation." Harris's frown deepened as he listened to her account. He looked back at Kane, whose face was now flushed with anger. "Is that true?" Harris asked Kane directly. "Did you forcibly take her case?" Kane bristled, his temper flaring. "I had every right to inspect that case. She was being uncooperative and evasive. I was doing my job." Harris raised an eyebrow, his expression skeptical. "And the device? What kind of discharge are we talking about here?" "It's harmless if handled correctly," Lauren interjected before Kane could respond. "It's a prototype for an energy redistribution system. When he mishandled it, the safety mechanism activated to prevent damage, It's designed to be safe, but it requires specialized knowledge to operate properly. Harris studied her for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly as he processed the information. He turned to one of the other officers. "Check the case," he said, gesturing toward the bench. "Carefully." The officer nodded and approached the case with caution, glancing at Lauren for confirmation. She gave a small nod, signaling that it was safe to open. The officer flipped the latches and lifted the lid, revealing the sleek, glowing device inside. He examined it briefly before stepping back, clearly uncertain about what he was looking at. "Sergeant, this doesn't look like anything dangerous," the officer said, his tone cautious. "But it's definitely not something I'd want to mess with without knowing what it is." Harris nodded and turned back to Kane. "So, let me get this straight," he said, his voice calm but edged with authority. "You confiscated a piece of specialized equipment that you didn't understand, triggered a safety discharge, and then called for backup because she refused to comply." Kane's face turned an even deeper shade of red. She was resisting, he insisted, his voice rising. She refused to follow orders and acted like she had something to hide. Harris held up a hand, cutting him off. "Enough," he said sharply. He turned back to Lauren. "Ma'am, do you have any identification on you? Something that can verify your account?" Lauren nodded and reached into her pocket, moving slowly and deliberately to avoid any misunderstanding. She pulled out her ID and handed it to Harris, who examined it closely. His eyes flicked back to her, and his expression shifted slightly, a hint of recognition crossing his face. "Dr. Lauren Bryant," he said, reading her name aloud. "You're an engineer?" "Yes, Sergeant," she replied. "I specialize in energy systems. That device is part of a project I've been working on for years. It's valuable, not just in terms of cost, but in terms of the work it represents." I tried to explain that to Officer Kane, but he wouldn't listen. Harris nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. He handed her ID back and turned to Kane once more. "Officer Kane, this situation is starting to look like a serious misunderstanding. You overstepped your bounds by mishandling her property, and from what I can see, Dr. Bryant was trying to de-escalate, not resist." Kane opened his mouth to argue, but Harris held up a hand again. "No, I'm not interested in excuses. I'm interested in facts. And right now, the facts don't look good for you." Lauren felt a flicker of relief at Harris's words, but she remained cautious. The situation wasn't fully resolved, and she knew Kane wouldn't back down easily. His pride and anger were too deeply entrenched. "I want this resolved properly," Lauren said, her voice steady but firm. "I'm not trying to cause trouble, but I won't tolerate being treated like a criminal for no reason. If there's an issue, let's address it professionally." Harris nodded. "Agreed," he said. "Dr. Bryant, you're free to go. We'll handle this from here." Kane's face contorted with rage, but he said nothing. Lauren picked up her case, her movements calm and deliberate. As she walked away, she could feel Kane's glare burning into her back, but she refused to look back. She had stood her ground, and for now that was enough. The situation had reached its midpoint, but Lauren knew the battle for accountability was far from over. Kane wasn't the type to let go of a grudge, and she would have to remain vigilant. For now, though, she allowed herself a moment of quiet victory, her resolve stronger than ever. The tension that had momentarily eased with Sergeant Harris's intervention quickly reignited as Officer Kane's frustration reached a boiling point. Lauren walked away from the patrol cars with her case firmly in hand, her posture straight and composed, but her mind still racing with the adrenaline of the encounter. She had made it through the immediate conflict, but she knew it wasn't over. Kane wasn't the type to let things go, and the dark glint in his eyes as he glared after her only confirmed what she feared. Behind her, she could hear the low hum of the officers' voices as Harris continued to reprimand Kane, his tone sharp and authoritative. But Kane was a man who thrived on his ability to seize control, and with that control slipping through his fingers, his fury only deepened. Lauren hadn't made it more than 20 paces before she heard Kane's voice cut the quiet. "She's not leaving here like that." His words rang out like a warning, laced with defiance. Lauren stopped mid-step and turned slowly, her pulse quickening. Kane was already striding toward her, his movements quick and aggressive, ignoring Harris's outstretched arm trying to stop him. "Kane," Harris barked, his voice laced with frustration. "Stand down. This situation is resolved." But Kane wasn't listening. His mind was a storm of wounded pride, misplaced anger, and the insatiable need to reassert himself. To him, Lauren's composed demeanor and her refusal to bow to his demands had been a personal attack, a challenge to his authority that he couldn't let go unanswered. His focus was singular, his rage now driving him to double down on his mistakes. Lauren held her ground, her body tense but her expression calm. She understood that backing away would only embolden him, and she wouldn't give him the satisfaction of thinking he had intimidated her. Still, she couldn't deny the flicker of fear in her chest. Kane was unpredictable, and his actions so far had proven he wasn't afraid to escalate beyond reason. "What are you doing, Officer Kane?" Lauren said evenly as he closed the distance between them. "This has already gone too far. You need to stop." Kane's eyes burned with fury, and his voice was tight with barely contained rage. "You think you can walk away from this? You think you can make a fool out of me and just leave?" Lauren's jaw tightened, her hands gripping the handle of her case more firmly. "No one's making a fool out of you, officer," she said, her tone measured but firm. "This isn't personal. Let it go." But Kane couldn't let it go. He stepped closer, his body imposing and his voice rising. "You don't get to tell me what to do. You don't get to walk away. Not until I say so." Behind Kane, Harris and the other officers were catching up, their expressions ranging from alarm to exasperation. Harris's voice cut through the air again. "Kane, that's enough. Back off now." But Kane ignored him. His hand moved to his belt, and Lauren felt her breath catch as she saw him draw his baton. The polished metal glinted in the light as he gripped it tightly, his posture radiating threat. "I'm done playing games," he growled. "You're coming with me one way or another." Lauren's mind raced as she quickly assessed her options. She knew she couldn't afford to appear aggressive, but she also couldn't let him force her into submission. She shifted her stance slightly, preparing for the possibility of self-defense, but keeping her movements deliberate and non-threatening. "Put the baton down," she said calmly. "This isn't going to end the way you think it will." Kane sneered, taking another step closer. "You're under arrest for resisting an officer and obstruction," he said, his tone dripping with venom. "You can come quietly, or I can make you." Lauren opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, Harris finally caught up, stepping between them and holding up a hand to block Kane. "Kane, that's enough," Harris shouted, his voice thunderous. "You're out of line." Kane glared at his superior, his grip on the baton tightening. "She resisted, Sergeant. She's walking away like she's above the law. Someone needs to put her in her place." Harris's face darkened, and his voice dropped to a dangerous level. "The only one out of place here is you, Kane. Stand down now, or you'll be the one facing charges." For a moment it seemed like Kane might relent. His gaze flicked between Harris and Lauren, his chest rising and falling with rapid, angry breaths. But then, as if spurred on by the weight of his own humiliation, he made his move. Kane lunged past Harris, his baton raised, and swung it toward Lauren with reckless force. Everything seemed to slow in that moment. Lauren's instincts kicked in, her years of martial arts training taking over. She sidestepped the swing with precision, her movements fluid and controlled. As the baton asked through the air, she reached out and caught Kane's wrist, twisting it just enough to force him to drop the weapon. The baton clattered to the ground, the sound sharp and final. "Stop this," Lauren said sharply, her voice ringing with authority. "You are out of control." Kane staggered back, his face a mask of shock and rage. He opened his mouth to shout something, but before he could, Harris stepped forward and placed a firm hand on his chest, pushing him back. "That's it, Kane," Harris growled. "You're done. Hand over your badge and weapon." Kane froze, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You're siding with her," he spat, his voice trembling with anger. "After everything." Harris didn't waver. "You've crossed every line tonight," he said coldly. "Your actions have jeopardized this department and everyone here. You're relieved of duty, effective immediately." The other officers stepped forward, one of them picking up the fallen baton while another moved to escort Kane away. Kane resisted at first, his body rigid with defiance, but eventually he allowed himself to be led away, his head hanging low and his face dark with anger. Lauren stood silently, her breathing steady but her mind still reeling from the encounter. She watched as Kane was taken to one of the patrol cars, his muttered curses barely audible over the hum of tension that still hung in the air. Harris turned to her, his expression apologetic but resolute. "Dr. Bryant," he said, his tone softer now, "I'm sorry this happened. Officer Kane's behavior was unacceptable, and I'll make sure it's addressed appropriately." Lauren met his gaze, her own expression calm but guarded. "Thank you, Sergeant," she said. "But this shouldn't have happened in the first place. You need to do better to ensure that officers like him don't have the opportunity to abuse their power." Harris nodded, his jaw tightening. "You're absolutely right," he said, "and I'll personally see to it that changes are made." Lauren nodded in return, though she knew words alone wouldn't be enough to fix the systemic issues that had led to this moment. Still, for now she had held her ground and protected both herself and her work. As she walked away from the scene, her case clutched tightly in her hand, she felt a surge of determination. This wasn't just a victory for her, it was a call to action, a reminder of the work that still needed to be done to ensure accountability and justice. And she wouldn't stop until that work was complete. The silence that followed Officer Kane's removal was heavy, charged with an unease that seemed to ripple through the park. Lauren stood still, her chest rising and falling in measured breaths, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on her. The bystanders who had gathered during the confrontation now began to disperse, though a few lingered, their curious gazes flicking between Lauren, the other officers, and the patrol car where Kane now sat, his figure slumped in sullen defeat. The tension in the air had not dissipated, it had only shifted, evolving into a sense of anticipation, as though everyone present was bracing for whatever might come next. Sergeant Harris approached Lauren, his expression tired but resolute. He had the look of a man who had seen too many conflicts escalate unnecessarily, and was determined to prevent this one from spiraling any further. The other officers stood at a cautious distance, their postures still wary, but their hands no longer hovered near their weapons. It was a fragile truce, a moment balanced on the edge of resolution and potential chaos. "Dr. Bryant," Harris began, his voice firm but measured, "I want to thank you for maintaining your composure. I know this situation has been incredibly difficult, and I want to assure you that Officer Kane's actions will be thoroughly investigated. Lauren met his gaze, her expression calm but unyielding. "Thank you, Sergeant," she replied. "But an apology and an investigation don't undo the damage that was almost done." This wasn't just about one officer's poor judgment. It's about a system that allows someone like him to feel empowered to act this way in the first place. Harris nodded, his jaw tightening. "You're right," he admitted. "This kind of behavior is unacceptable, and it reflects poorly on all of us. I won't deny that we have a lot of work to do to rebuild trust, both with the public and within our own ranks. But I promise you, Kane's actions won't be swept under the rug." Lauren appreciated his candor, but she wasn't ready to let him off the hook so easily. "Sergeant, I don't doubt your sincerity," she said, her voice steady but sharp. "But promises don't change the fact that I was treated like a criminal for sitting in a park with my work. My work, by the way, is designed to protect lives, something Officer Kane didn't seem to care about when he mishandled my device and nearly caused a dangerous discharge." Harris's brow furrowed, and he glanced toward the bench where Lauren's case still sat, its presence a stark reminder of the chaos that had unfolded. "I'd like to know more about this device," he said, his tone shifting to one of genuine curiosity. "You mentioned earlier that it's a prototype for energy redistribution. Could you explain what that means?" Lauren hesitated for a moment, weighing the risks of sharing too much. But she realized that transparency might be her best weapon in this situation. If the officers understood the importance of her work, it would be harder for them to dismiss what had happened as a minor incident. "It's a high-voltage energy redistribution system," she explained, stepping closer to the bench and resting a hand on the case. "It's designed to safely absorb and redistribute excess electrical energy, preventing overloads and reducing the risk of power grid failures. It's particularly useful in emergency situations, where surges of energy can cause catastrophic damage if not managed properly." Harris nodded slowly, his interest clearly piqued. "And the discharge we saw earlier?" he asked. Lauren opened the case carefully, revealing the sleek, futuristic device inside. Its surface shimmered faintly with residual energy, a testament to its cutting-edge design. "That was a safety mechanism," she said, gesturing toward a small panel on the device's side. "When it detects unauthorized handling or tampering, it releases a controlled burst of energy to neutralize the threat. It's not meant to harm anyone, but it can be dangerous if triggered repeatedly." One of the other officers, a younger man with an earnest expression, stepped closer to get a better look. "So, it's like a fail-safe?" he asked. "Exactly," Lauren replied. "But it's not foolproof. If someone mishandles it or uses an external energy source, like a stun baton, it can cause the system to overload. That's why I was so adamant about not letting Officer Kane touch it. He didn't understand what he was dealing with, and his actions could have had serious consequences." Harris's expression darkened as he processed her words. "I see," he said grimly. "And yet, despite your warnings, he chose to escalate the situation." Lauren nodded, her gaze steady. "He didn't see me as a professional or even as a person," she said bluntly. "He saw me as a problem to be dealt with, someone who needed to be put in their place. And that mindset is exactly why things like this keep happening." The younger officer shifted uncomfortably, clearly troubled by her words. Harris, however, met her gaze without flinching. "You're right," he said again, his voice heavy with the weight of his admission. "And that's something we need to address not just in this precinct, but across the board." Lauren appreciated his honesty, but she wasn't ready to let her guard down just yet. "Words are important," she said, her tone measured, "but actions matter more. What happened here today can't just be another incident that gets filed away and forgotten. It has to mean something. Harris nodded, his expression resolute. It will, he promised. I'll make sure of it. Before Lauren could respond, the sound of footsteps approached from behind, and she turned to see one of the bystanders, a middle-aged man with a weathered face and a determined expression, stepping forward. He held his phone in one hand, the screen still glowing faintly. "Excuse me," he said, his voice firm but polite. "I just wanted to say that I saw everything. If you need a witness, I'm happy to provide my account." Lauren glanced at Harris, who nodded in agreement. "We'd appreciate that," he said, gesturing for the man to step closer. "Your statement could be helpful." The man nodded and looked at Lauren. "What happened to you wasn't right," he said. "You handled yourself with more composure than most people would have in your situation. I just wanted you to know that." Lauren offered him a small, grateful smile. "Thank you," she said. "That means a lot." As the man provided his statement to one of the officers, Lauren turned her attention back to Harris. "What happens now?" she asked, her tone calm but firm. "How do we move forward from this?" Harris sighed, his shoulders sagging slightly under the weight of his responsibility. "Kane will be placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation," he said. "We'll review the evidence, including witness statements and any video recordings, and take appropriate action. I'll also recommend additional training for the entire department, focusing on de-escalation and implicit bias." Lauren nodded, though she knew the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges. "That's a start," she said. "But it's only the beginning. Real change takes more than just training. It takes accountability, transparency, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths." Harris met her gaze, his expression somber but determined. "I understand," he said, "and I'll do everything I can to ensure this doesn't happen again." Lauren studied him for a moment, searching for any sign of insincerity. But she saw only determination in his eyes, and she allowed herself a small measure of hope. "Thank you, Sergeant," she said. "I appreciate your willingness to listen and take action." Harris nodded, and for the first time since the confrontation began, the tension between them seemed to ease. "You take care, Dr. Bryant," he said. "And if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to reach out." Lauren offered him a faint smile. "I will," she said. "And thank you." As she turned to leave, her case securely in hand, she felt a sense of quiet resolve settle over her. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot, but she had made her stand, and she had done so with dignity and strength. She wouldn't let this experience define her, but she would use it to fuel her determination to create a better future, one where no one else would have to face what she had endured today. The days following the confrontation in the park were anything but quiet. For Lauren, the ordeal didn't end when she walked away with her case. It had only shifted to a new stage, one that required just as much focus, determination, and emotional resilience as the confrontation itself. She spent hours replaying the events in her mind, scrutinizing every word, every action, every moment where things could have gone differently. But what stood out most was the bitter truth that no matter how calm, composed, and professional she had been, it had not shielded her from the unwarranted suspicion and aggression of someone who wielded authority recklessly. The incident quickly gained traction within the precinct and beyond, as Sergeant Harris pushed forward with the promised investigation. Internal Affairs reviewed every detail, from witness statements to Kane's record, uncovering a troubling pattern of misconduct that had long been overlooked. The officers who had responded as backup were also interviewed, with many admitting their discomfort with Kane's behavior and his escalating rage during the confrontation. Harris himself became a key figure in the inquiry, ensuring that no detail was left unexamined. For Kane, the fallout was swift. The official report cited his actions as a breach of protocol, an abuse of authority, and a clear demonstration of unfitness to serve. He was placed on unpaid leave pending disciplinary proceedings, but it became clear to everyone involved that his career as a law enforcement officer was effectively over. The weight of his actions and the scrutiny of his peers left him isolated and bitter, but Lauren knew that accountability was necessary. His removal from the force wasn't just about justice for her, it was about preventing future harm to others who might not have had the resources or resilience to stand up to someone like him. Despite this, Lauren's focus was never solely on Kane. She understood that while his behavior had been egregious, it was a symptom of a larger issue. The system that allowed officers like him to operate unchecked was the real problem, and addressing that would take more than removing one individual. With this in mind, Lauren decided to take action, channeling her frustration and anger into something constructive. She reached out to Harris and requested a formal meeting with him and other key members of the department to discuss systemic reforms. To her surprise, Harris agreed without hesitation. The meeting took place a week later in the precinct's conference room. Lauren arrived prepared, carrying not just her case but also a detailed proposal outlining potential solutions. Harris greeted her with a firm handshake and an apologetic expression, while several other senior officers looked on with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Lauren wasn't deterred. She had faced far more challenging rooms than this one, and she knew that the only way forward was through open dialogue. "Thank you for coming, Dr. Bryant," Harris began, his tone respectful. "I want to start by apologizing again for what happened to you. It was unacceptable, and I take full responsibility for allowing someone like Kane to remain on the force for as long as he did. We failed you, and we failed this community." Lauren nodded, appreciating his candor. "Thank you, Sergeant Harris," she replied. "I accept your apology, but I'm not here for apologies alone. I'm here because I believe we can turn this into an opportunity to create meaningful change." Harris nodded in agreement, and Lauren launched into her presentation. She began by recounting the events of the incident, not as a personal grievance, but as a case study in what happens when implicit bias and a lack of accountability go unchecked. She spoke about the systemic issues that fostered an environment where officers like Kane felt empowered to act with impunity and emphasized the need for comprehensive reforms. "I understand that policing is a difficult job," Lauren said, her voice steady and measured. "But that's precisely why it's so important to ensure that those who take on this responsibility are held to the highest standards. It's not enough to remove officers who fail to meet those standards. We need to address the root causes that allow these failures to persist." She outlined several key recommendations, including mandatory de-escalation training, implicit bias workshops, and the implementation of an independent oversight committee to handle complaints and investigations. She also proposed a program to build stronger relationships between law enforcement and the communities they served, emphasizing the importance of trust and mutual respect. As Lauren spoke, she could see the officers in the room reacting in different ways. Some nodded in agreement, while others crossed their arms or shifted uncomfortably in their seats. She anticipated resistance change was never easy, especially in institutions steeped in tradition and hierarchy, but she was determined to make her case. "I'm not here to vilify law enforcement," she said, addressing the room directly. "I'm here because I believe that you have the power to be better, to do better. What happened to me shouldn't happen to anyone, but if it does, there needs to be a system in place that ensures accountability and justice." When she finished, the room fell silent for a moment. Then Harris spoke, his voice firm but thoughtful. "Dr. Bryant, "I won't pretend that this will be easy," he said. "The changes you're proposing are significant, and they'll face resistance not just from within the department, but from the larger system we're a part of. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. I think you're right. This is an opportunity and I'm willing to fight for it." Lauren felt a flicker of hope at his words. It wasn't a victory, but it was a step in the right direction. Over the next hour, the group discussed her proposals in detail, with Harris taking the lead in addressing concerns and pushing back against objections. By the end of the meeting, they had agreed to form a task force to begin implementing some of the recommendations, starting with a review of the department's training protocols and complaint procedures. As she left the precinct that day, Lauren felt a sense of cautious optimism. She knew that real change would take time, and there would undoubtedly be setbacks along the way. But for the first time since the incident, she felt like progress was possible. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Lauren continued to work closely with the task force, offering her expertise and perspective as they began to draft new policies and programs. At the same time, she resumed her professional responsibilities, balancing her role as an engineer with her newfound advocacy work.